Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. This is part 2 of a show with Krista Berry, the new director of the Old Stone House Museum. Welcome back to the show.
Yes, thanks for having me again.
the last segment was great. I think you and I think between us, we could probably at least have a 10-part show.
Very easily, I think.
Very easy. That was enjoyable. We ended it with a bit about Old Stone House Day and the 100th anniversary of the Old Stone House as a museum. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so let's go back to Old Stone House Day and its significance this year.
Yeah, so Old Stone House Day is such an important day for the museum. It is kind of our big annual blowout. It's kind of a way to think of it is our big annual party.
Right.
You know, it's the biggest day to have for an open house as well. So on a regular day when you come to visit the museum, Wednesday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., we have timed tours of the Old Stone House at 11, 1, and 3. On Old Stone House Day, admission is free and all 4 stories are open for people to come and be able to explore outside of the sort of guided tour that they would have to do on any other day. What's also fun about Old Stone House Day is it is older than the museum itself. So even though this is the 100 years of Old Stone House as a museum, Old Stone House Day is even longer and goes back even farther. I had kind of mentioned to you, I don't remember if it was on air or off, that in 1925, the Old Stone House Day at that time, there was a newspaper reported 2,000 people attended and 400 cars, which to remind people in 1925, cars are super new.
Right.
So the fact that 400 of them made it onto the dirt horse paths of Brownington's roads to park at the Old Stone House. I would love to see a photo. If anyone has a photo, this is my plea, because I feel like there might be a photo somewhere in someone's house, because I'd love to see this. But
Right. Have you looked through all the newspapers of the time to see if you at least have a newspaper photo?
Not myself personally. Our registrar, Darlene Young, has been doing a lot of the kind of Old Stone House Day research. She's putting together a series of stories from the museum's past that's been highlighted in our newsletter. So I know she's looking for it. She hasn't come across it yet, but I know she's on the hunt.
So you mentioned the 100th anniversary as a museum, and you mentioned in the last segment about that doesn't mean the Old Stone House is 100 years old. You might want to just, for people who didn't watch or listen to the first segment, about what you mean by 100 years.
For sure, yeah. So the Old Stone House itself as a building was built in 1834 to about 1836, took about 2 years to be constructed by Alexander Lucius Twilight, a man with a great name.
Yeah.
And Alexander built it really by legend, single-handedly, just himself with an ox, because he did not get the blessing of the Brownington Board of Selectmen at that time. And so, although I do not believe in reality that him and a lone ox were the sole constructors of this.
And the ox was, the story goes, that the ox was later, the ox was at the top, right?
He was slaughtered at the end
Yeah.
because for some reason he couldn't come back down the ramp. So they slaughtered him and ate him at the end of the construction. What a thank you.
Any theories about the truth behind that?
I suspect, and we do know, one of the other houses on site, the Cyrus Eaton house, that we're actually working to do some renovation to open it back up to full use. We know Cyrus Eaton was a supporter, and we know that he, helped construct. So I do suspect that there were people in the community who were interested in the dormitory vision that Alexander Twilight had for the Orleans County Grammar School, the ability to house that many more students in the community that could go to the boarding school that was the Orleans County Grammar School. So I suspect there was a group of, very able-bodied and able-minded, willful folks who came together and made this happen. But of course, all of the credit very much goes towards Alexander Twilight, and it was his vision and his,
And so what happened in your theory happened to the ox? Did he meet his demise at the top, or do you think that's legend?
That's such a good question. At this moment, I have no reason to believe it's anything other than legend.
Right.
But I am new to
Right.
the archives, and so I am not the person who has laid my eyes on all there
Right.
is to learn. So I could be proven wrong,
Right.
but I suspect that if there was an ox that was eaten, it was probably due to old age or injury, probably more than not being able to back down a ramp, which is often the way the story goes.
You know about history versus legend. It's actually sometimes difficult to fact from fiction, because something is written about. Like, I've even made mistakes. Yes, I have, and I've tried to correct them, because things that you grow up, I don't know if this has happened to you, things that you grew up knowing, once you get digging later on, like history things, like I'm thinking, I had that wrong, or I was even taught that wrong. Has that happened to you at all? Like, have you found yourself now realizing that maybe you were taught some things wrong, either by your parents or by the school?
100%, 100%. And that actually, it's so interesting too, because I think that really plays into a lot of the modern day struggles that our society is having with the way we learned history and the way we're now coming to learn that we were mistaught history. There were things that were glossed over, right? There's phrases we've come to appreciate, like whitewashing, that is reality as far as trying to give kind of a fluffed up positive version of history.
Right.
And so there's a level to which I think people feel like they were lied to. And there is stuff like that does happen. There were omissions, there were actual things that people tried to change about history to make the stories more palatable or to make their point more poignant. But then there are also just discoveries that make you realize you're wrong,
Right.
and it's the endlessly fascinating thing about history is it feels, I think, to the outsider very stagnant. And with people who don't really do the research and the writing and really understand how history comes to be, how often a box in somebody's attic can change everything you know
Right.
about a story you've been taught your whole life.
Right.
And that is a reality.
Right.
So
One of my proudest things in research, in chronicling history and telling people's stories and then doing the research, is sometimes being the bad guy. There are people who want me to write just happy, especially communities. They want me to write happy things because they mistake me for a PR person. I'm not a PR person, and I don't look at history as neither good nor bad. It is what it is. Of course, yes, there is bad things, but when I'm recording it, like, I have written quite extensively about the Ku Klux Klan in the region, and the cross burn, as I interviewed people who remembered the cross burn. There's people who will say, well, you probably shouldn't write about that. Let that be. Let that rest. No, we've got to know those things. I'm more than happy to write about, white picket fences and quaint village commons and stuff. But don't be surprised if on the next page I'm writing about, it's like, for example, when I've recorded, one of my passions over the years, which I used to be able to fill a high school library at North Country filled with World War II veterans. Now most of them are gone.
Yeah.
But in recording the World War II veteran stories, I've also interviewed the German soldiers who settled here after the war. And so
that'd be interesting
oh, yeah,
to hear
yeah,
their
right.
perspectives.
Oh, yeah. And the war brides who sometimes came home with the Americans. So like I'm fond of saying well, when I worked for the Chronicle, one editor used to say you knew you were doing something right when you get people on both sides mad at you at the same time, because you're doing something right. But seldom do I actually make people mad at me. But there are people who, when I do write a story that isn't flattering to an area, like, you could bypass. No, that's part of our history, and I'm not going to leave it out just because it's kind of gnarly.
History's messy.
Yep. Oh,
You know,
it is.
history is life, and life is messy.
Right.
And things are so gray, you know, and I think that is to our benefit to embrace about humans past. Because I do agree with you that there is I think a longing, and in some ways that's part of the disservice that we did to ourselves, because history has for a long time been used as a means to build this kind of national image. You know, I don't want to use the propaganda term,
Right.
But I mean, it's kind of in that vein. Like you said, it's PR. It's using a story to form a national identity that makes you proud to be part of that heritage. But then the shoe drops, because you start picking away at that story. And when you start telling the reality of the story, that's, I think, where people feel like they were lied to.
Right.
And now we're reconciling with what is our past in reality versus what we would really like it to be.
Right.
You know, and in some ways, I think it's up to us to build the future we want it to be based on what we were dissatisfied with the past.
Right.
You know, the past is there to learn from. And if we're not learning from it, often, like the adage goes, we keep repeating it, which is the curse of historians to watch.
And you know, the other thing, one thing I kind of chuckle about is when people talk about the good old days. And, you know, there were good things about, you know, like when I was growing up or my parents were, there were. But sometimes we kind of sugarcoat them, like, and I'll say to people, "Oh, you mean the good old days when you stepped on a nail, and you might just, you know, before me, you might die, or like, you know how many people I've interviewed who are in their, well, they're probably gone now, but even still women in their 90s who lost children in childbirth, or people who lost mothers in childbirth, and it wasn't, history isn't always as rosy. Even our personal history or our local history isn't as rosy as we like to pretend it was.
Yeah. You know, and I think Americans kind of like a dirty story.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, too. I think as much as there is that kind of longing for the good old days, I think that's so much more a symptom of nostalgia and brain development based on age than anything in reality. You know what I mean? So I think we do that a lot to ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
More than anything else. And I think, too, the thing that I find interesting about the kingdom in general as well is we kind of like a heroic outlaw. You know, we kind of like somebody who skirts into the gray. We like to see the underdog win, and very often in local history, our underdogs are not the stories that you would see on the cover of books and other places.
You will in mine.
Exactly, you know, which is what makes the kingdom interesting. You know?
Because this is what I tell people is, I will do stories on prominent people, but a lot of times people are only important in their own minds. And some of the stories I have told come from ordinary people who, some of them have lived ordinary lives, but a lot of them are ordinary people who've lived extraordinary lives, and you just didn't know they had.
Yes.
And a lot of times people who jump up and down and tell me they have a story, they don't have a story. But a lot of people who tell me they don't have a story they have a story. So, but that's how come I've always had you folks at the Old Stone House on, even though we do things a little bit different. I appreciate your work. So I've had Peggy Day Gibson, Molly Vasey, now you, and of course then I've had, I don't know what role Bob Hunt is in now, but he's been on the show.
He's our Associate Director of Operations.
Right, and so this is your 100th year, and we talked a little bit about it last time, but what more do you plan to do this year?
Yeah, so getting back to Old Stone House, I'll mention that this year we did make a slight change, and a change to harken back to the original. So in the last few years, Old Stone House Day has been on the second Sunday of the month of August. Historically, it was always either on the day of Battle of Bennington or the closest weekend.
Right.
So we've actually made that change, and we're going back to the original weekend close to Battle of Bennington Day. So this year, Old Stone House Day will be August 17th. In addition to Old Stone House Day, which is our big centennial blowout, so we really, invite the community to come celebrate with us. We're going to be doing some other fun throwback surprises to the days gone by of Old Stone days in the past, as well as inviting, many community members to come and share. We're also going to be sending invitations to other local historical societies to hopefully have them come to also visit. So we really want to celebrate our local history this year, like you said, in that kind of like in a celebratory vein.
Right.
Take a minute to really, have a good time. And then we'll also be having I believe this year will be our third, maybe it's our fourth. I think it's our third annual Fiber Fair. Right. That I think is September 20th. And then we'll also be doing a haunted history programs in October. More to come on that. And but in the meantime, we'll also be doing a lecture series. We have a couple new exhibits opening, and we'll also be hosting a traveling Smithsonian exhibit with the help of Newport Downtown Development. We'll be hosting it right on Main Street in Newport at the Tasting Center.
Right. Now, why was it important for you to move back to the original date of the Old Stone House Day?
It was one of those things where we talked about why it got moved in the first place,
and why was
right?
that?
So, well, come to find out, it seemed that it was mostly to avoid conflict with the Barton Fair, the Orleans County Fair, because if we were having our big shindig while they're having their big shindig, our audiences get a little split up. So I've been told that one of the reasons, and it might not be the exclusive reason, but one of them was to actually avoid that conflict. And now the Barton Fair isn't in August anymore.
But here's the thing is, I don't know if you realize it.
Yeah.
People complained. Some people complained when they moved it to September, and they said, well, it should have been when it always was in August. But historically, it was September. So you guys, you're the two
We're all
groups.
moving around each other.
You guys, like Barton Fair is back to its original, which was September, which allows you to go back to your original there.
Yep.
It all worked out for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So it was the staff, we talked about it, and there were some internal reasons too, just in our calendar that made sense from a production standpoint.
Right.
But we really liked the idea, particularly this year, of trying to pick some things out of the long history of Old Stone House Day to kind of bring back to today's Old Stone House Day, to play on that nostalgia.
Right. Yeah. Do you still have I remember going many times to Old Stone House Day. You had a lot of events going on to show people what it was like the Forge. Are you going to have the Forge going? I think it's a Forge.
Yes. Yeah, we'll still have the Forge going, and we still teach blacksmithing, and so we do have adult classes, and kind of older children are, teenagers are welcome with kind of parent consent. So we'll teach you how to be a blacksmith, and there will be demonstrations at the Blacksmith Forge on Old Stone House Day.
It seems like there's so much more happening at the Old Stone House, say in the last 25, 30 years than in my youthful mind. I don't recall much really going, other than being a museum, I don't recall that many events going on, but I'm sure your keepers of the archives might be able to tell me I'm wrong, and maybe I just didn't realize it. Do you think there's more going on? And like, did you go there when you were a kid?
It's kind of interesting to think about because I did. I'm sure I did, but I'm sure it was only on a school field trip. My parents are not interested in history like I am. My parents did not bring me to museums. That was not how I was introduced to the world of my career. And so certainly the school brought me, and I appreciate that. But I think that was the only time I ever got to go. So I really only saw it a few times other than driving by it, and my sister got married up at the observatory tower, as many people's family members have. And so there was always a connection to the place, but not so much the museum. And I'm happy now to kind of, with my love of museums, to come now to it as an adult and get to reestablish a new connection with it like that. But yeah, I would be interested to know, because it certainly feels like we are super busy. And I think too, that really stems a lot from the wonderful job Molly did as executive director for the last 8 years.
Yeah.
She really grew that institution. She's a phenomenal grant writer, which makes a big deal to a place like Old Stone House, and still is a very big deal for us, our grant systems. And so having grown, we really, we have, I think we have about 7 staff now. We have about 80 volunteers. And this year in particular feels especially busy, but it being a centennial, we wanted to really make the occasion. So we'll probably be a little quieter next year. But
then predating Molly, you had Peggy Day Gibson, who helped bring the whole campus together, with the school, and which then allowed Molly and crew to be able to focus on programming, and it's just you've had some very good leaders in the past couple decades. I think Peggy was there for quite a period of time.
I'm not sure how long her tenure as ED was. Yeah, but she still is present. She's still a member of our Buildings and Grounds Committee, so she is still actively involved with the museum as well, even if she's not a staff member anymore. And that's, I think, one of the beautiful things about the place. She's not the only people who have had tenure working there who now continue to volunteer there. And even Bob has promised me when he's done working, he will still be volunteering at the Old Stone House. So there's a lot of people there for the long run. And we just have such a beautiful community of human beings that really do make that village work,
I love seeing the old photos of, I think you've seen them too, the old photos of the Old Stone House when it weren't manicured, because back in the old days, I didn't even think about it as back in the old days, a lot of lawns were not manicured like they are now. It's like, until I did an article with the late Richard Colburn, who maintained in cemeteries for decades out in Charleston and buried people for decades. It never dawned on me. Now, if cemetery grass gets a little bit too high, people are complaining. He said back in the old days, especially out in Charleston, they'd let the grass grow, and then you'd go in and you'd hay it.
Yep.
And there's just some things I just never really thought about. So you've seen photos with the grass all high around the Old Stone House, haven't you?
Oh yeah, the fields were right up to the edge of the stone foundation. Yeah, for sure. Lawn manicuring really owes a lot to the modern engine, because how did you cut lawns before? Your own physical labor. How big was your lawn going to be when you're the one out there pushing it by hand? Or maybe you have an ox or a mule or somebody to help you eventually, but not until do you have lawnmowers with gas powered engines.
You must have one of those.
That evolution.
You must have one of those
the little
the blades
it
that go.
spins and yeah.
You must have one of those up here, don't you?
Oh yeah. We have a few different versions of lawn mowing material implements over the years, for sure.
I remember those when I was a kid, but they were even antiques back then. Like you were talking about how you grew up without much history in your life, but knowing your father, it's surprised that you don't hit the dirt bike racetrack up here, or maybe the race car track, because I know he loved his speed. Do you have any speeding tickets?
I actually am blessed to not have a lot of speeding tickets. It is amazing how I don't get caught because I do have a lead foot. I did inherit both my father and my mother's love of speed. I do have motorcycles. I used to fly planes. That's our 25 minutes. Okay. And I never raced, mostly because my dad wouldn't let me. He was too worried.
Oh, that's kind of hypocritical. His mother didn't want him.
I know. He always there's a few reasons, right? I'm very short. You can't tell from me sitting here in this desk, but I'm very little, and I was always very little, and so it was hard to find motorcycles that would fit me in the 90s. They didn't make them short enough for my legs to touch the ground, so I really kind of bypassed dirt bikes. And I mostly stuck to 3-wheelers and 4-wheelers because I didn't have to touch the ground on those. And then by the time I came of age for being able to reach the ground and these types of things, I left for college and blah, blah, blah. So I came back and learned to ride a motorcycle on my 1987, 1100 Sportster that I inherited from my dad that I grew up riding on the back of with him. So that was my first motorcycle I learned to drive on the lawn, which is not, I think, everyone's experience, but that was mine. And so.
Okay, we only have about 5 more minutes. As I said, we could do a 10-part show just talking history. So Old Stone, so this year there's a series of events coming up. How can people really, you must have I know you have a good website. What is it?
Yes, oldstonehousemuseum.org. That is this place to go for all of the updates and all of the things. I am actively posting and adding them, so you have to keep checking back as things become solidified. And also join our newsletter. It goes out monthly. That's another great way to stay connected in our happenings. And we are also on Facebook and Instagram. We are more active on Facebook. That's my fault, because I'm just not as good at Instagram.
Yeah, not either. No, it's been great having you on. Do you have any final words that you would like to? Do you got anything else you'd like to promote?
Gosh, I mean, really just the Old Stone House Museum at large. If you haven't been in a while, or maybe if you've never been at all, this is a great year to come and visit us. We have so much going on. And if you can't make one of our public events or one of our kind of more formal offerings, we are open Wednesday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 4. We offer tours 3 times a week, and you can come and do it on a quieter way. If you're not into the crowds, you can still come to see us in a different capacity. So there's something for everyone. We really do our best trying off something for everyone.
Well, hopefully I'll be in town this year. I'm not really certain for Old Stone House Day, so I often enjoyed it, and you can even take part in what is it? Oh, walking on stilts. I remember a friend and I just 3-4 years ago we had a stilt race, and this old guy, he kicked the butt of the young whippersnapper who thought he was going to school me in walking on stilts. I'm not like Steve. I can't remember his name. Plays Uncle Sam on his high stilts here.
Yeah. I can picture him. I don't know his name either.
And so I'm not like him, but I can hold my own.
Yeah. And the stilts come out still. We have those come out for almost all of our public events, so you could still come and play with those. And I might be remiss too if I don't do my due diligence to ask the community to also consider making a donation to the Old Stone House Museum. We rely very heavily on community support. We are your local history museum, and every dollar really counts. So if you if you can't join us in person, a donation is also a great way to show you care.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on. It was great, and I can't wait to have you. Back on.
Yeah, I'll be happy to come back. It was great chatting with you.
Right.
So
thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.